Brayden Yager continues to kick so much butt at the Memorial Cup. And you know what? It's damn fun having a prospect this good in the Penguin system.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes. You can follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes. Joined by my co-host, Patrick Damp. You can follow him on Twitter at Center for Wet, and you can follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. Of course, thank you all so much for making this your first listen/watch of the day. We are free and available on all platforms. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So Moose Jaw, they will play at least one more game at the Memorial Cup after beating Drummondville 5-3 on Tuesday night in the final round of the round robin. With that win, they will play in the semifinals on Friday against the loser of the Saginaw-London game. And honestly, Pat, it really doesn't matter who loses that game. Both of those teams have been the top two teams at the Memorial Cup, and you're going to have to go through both if you want to win this. So again, it really doesn't matter who they play. The winner of that London Saginaw game will play in the championship this weekend. So that is how the format works for the Memorial Cup. But getting back to this game, Moose Jaw gets out to a 3-0 lead. Drummondville makes it a game, especially in the third period, but it's Moose Jaw getting a shorthanded goal with less than 2 minutes to go in the third period, and then Brayden Yager icing it with an empty net goal. And obviously, speaking of Yager, he was fantastic for Moose Jaw once again. Obviously, the empty net goal is great, but he had two great assists, one of which came on the power play. And did you see that no-look pass that he had there? That is just, it's stuff you don't teach. And when I saw that pass, you know who it reminded me of? Former Penguin Phil Kessel. That's what that pass reminded me of, because Kessel used to do that so often with the Penguins when they were on the power play. And obviously, you had to account for Kessel's shot, one of the top releases in the league, just like how Yager has one of the top releases in his league. But Yager's passing is also off the charts, and you saw it on that assist. Again, it's something you don't teach, and Moose Jaw needed its best players to be its best players, and Yager was definitely that. Just another fantastic game from him. Once again, he now has 6 points in 3 games in the Memorial Cup. What are your thoughts on Brayden Yager's performance?
I mean, what's left to say at this point? I mean, he is absolutely shining on the biggest stage for the Warriors. And don't look now, but those 6 points, good for second in the tournament, second only to his teammate Denton Matachuk, And then same thing, him and Matachuk both are tied along with Ruslan Gazov for the most goals in the tournament with 3. Empty net or not, it's a winner. It's a very short tournament. There's not a lot of margin for error. And at this point, he's really stepping up. And like you said in the intro, it's nice to finally have a prospect to look forward to in the Penguins system who's producing this well on such a big stage. And it really all gets into the main theme of what you and I have talked about, of what we wanted to see from Yager at this tournament. And that's the fact that he is stepping up in the biggest moments. He's showing that he is a player who, when the games start to mean more, he rises his level of play. And he has done that, especially last night, because that was, for all intents and purposes, Moose Jaw's season. If they were to lose, they were done. That was it. They were not going to play in the semifinal of the Memorial Cup. Their season ended last night. But him and all his teammates step up. They put up a great effort, and he is a main driver of it, and they stay alive for at least one more game.
Obviously, his release is spectacular, but it's been awesome seeing him add other things to his repertoire. I mean, he's turned into a really nice playmaker for Moose Jaw. I think he's worked on his two-way game as well. I still think he kind of fits the profile of a top 6 winger in the NHL as of right now, but he just continues to play fabulously. And you can see why at the start of last season, before he got drafted by the Penguins, you can see why he was a consensus top 5 to top 10 pick at that time, before I know he slid down some rankings. I mean, my draft board at this time last year, I had Yager, I believe it was 4th or 5th on my list. He was someone who I could definitely see the Penguins taking. I had a couple other players ahead of him that were there at the time, but I was still totally fine with the Yager pick. But you can see with the level that he's playing at, why he was a consensus top 5 to 10 pick heading into the draft last year.
Oh, it's no doubt that the Penguins got very lucky that this guy fell to them in the draft last year, because you look at a player like Yager and all of the skills and everything that you would want in a pick like Yager was there. And I'm truly surprised that the Penguins were able to snag him where they did. Because like you said, going into the draft last summer, I had him on a wish list. He was a guy that I was very impressed by. You could see it in the numbers. You could see it in the film. Solid player with great top 6 potential at the NHL level, should he develop correctly. And again, that's something we do have to add. You know, when he gets to the big stage, you see this all the time. There are guys who dominate juniors. There are guys who put up great numbers in the minors, and then once they get to the NHL level, it doesn't always translate. But I look at the fundamentals of his game, and I see a guy who can develop into a full-time NHLer in 2, 3, maybe 4 years, because the things he does, all he has to do is continue on the track that he's on. He has to be willing to work. He's going to have to put on some muscle. He's going to have to get that almost trial by fire over the next couple of years, whether it's having another dominant season with Moose Jaw and then moving up to the NHL or AHL level and showing he can do it there. But right now, all the fundamentals of his game, the shot, the vision, he works on his speed a little bit. He is definitely someone I can see carving out a nice NHL career.
Agreed. And training camp for him alone is going to be really interesting to follow. If we've talked about this on the show before, just because we've been following Moose Jaw's run to potentially winning the Memorial Cup, but if he fully blows away everyone at camp, it might be a little bit difficult to send him back to junior. I still think at this point, he probably is going to go back to junior. And I think right now still, it's best for him if he does. But if he goes in there and does what he did at last year's camp, but ups that to, 4 to 5 degrees higher, the Penguins will have a really fascinating choice in that situation overall.
I think regardless, what has to happen with him going into training camp this fall is basically give him damn near all of it. Give him right to the end, with the understanding that, yeah, we're probably going to send you back to Moose Jaw, but
put him with the big boys too. Put him
exactly.
up with Crosby, put him up with Malkin, etc.
Because you think back to last year, he did not look out of place. He started to fade near the end a little bit, and you expected that because he's a young guy, new pick, only has his junior experience. But with everything he's done this season, I think if nothing else, he has very much earned a full look at training camp next year, a chance to play with the big guns, a chance to stick around for the entire camp. And even if he doesn't make it out of camp, he is going to get exposure to guys like Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, Chris Letang, Erik Karlsson, Michael Bunting, and whomever else the Penguins bring in this offseason. So he'll get a taste of what it takes to stick in the NHL, because it's an old cliche, and it sounds silly to say, but getting to the NHL is the easy part. The hard part is staying there, because once you get that call, all that work, everything you did, you feel like you've reached the top of the mountain, but then you find out a lot more goes into it than just making the show. So you get to learn from some absolute living legends in Crosby, Malkin, Letang, Karlsson, et cetera, et cetera. Those guys will teach you, hey, getting here is only the first step. If you want to remain here, it is a very expensive price to pay, and it costs quite a lot.
Yeah, and even if he doesn't make the team, he can take those lessons back to junior for just that last season. And then for next year, whether it's with the big squad or the AHL with Wilkes-Barre, we'll have to see. But I think the time is getting real close to seeing him on the NHL roster, and that's getting me pretty excited overall. But I think that'll do it for this first segment. Coming up in the second segment, Pat and I have another potential UFA defenseman to discuss, as we're almost 4 weeks away from the start of free agency. And can you believe that, by the way? About a month to go until July 1. It's going to be here before we know it. But before we get to that, we have to tell you all about our first sponsor, which is FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and so much more. All you have to do is visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. That's FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Damp. So, Pat, we discussed quite a bit about the left side of the defensive group for the Penguins during our Tuesday episode, and how there's quite a few questions still outside of Marcus Pettersson, whether it's Ryan Graves and whether he can bounce back, whether it's P.O. Joseph and whether the Penguins want to re-sign him, et cetera, et cetera. But one player that I could see the Penguins potentially going after in free agency is Calgary Flames defenseman Oliver Kylington. So he only played in 33 games for the Flames this past season. He made his comeback in January of this year. He had not played since May of 2022. He was dealing with some mental health issues. And Pat, I know I speak for you with this. We both just hope that he is very much okay after coming back from that, just because he hadn't played hockey in almost 2 years. But he spent 7 full seasons with the Flames. And, even though he hadn't played hockey in over a year, he played pretty well in only 33 games, 3 goals, 8 points during that time. In his last full season with the Flames, 2021-2022, in 73 games, 9 goals, 31 points in those 73 games. He can play on the left side. He can play on the right side. But I'm looking at him as a purely left shot D for this team. His underlines are also really sound. And another big thing, he's only 27 years old right now. So I know a lot of people out there, myself included, want this team to get younger. Well, you would definitely be doing that with this move, but he can move the puck up the ice. He brings decent offense. He can play well in his own zone. If your top 4 is something along the lines of Marcus Pettersson and Oliver Kylington on your left side, I think you're doing something right.
For sure. And it kind of feels like this guy's flying under the radar a little bit in this upcoming UFA class. He doesn't really get talked about a whole lot, but like you said, 27 years old. You look at his underlines, and last season only playing in 33 games. Let's remember, Calgary was not that good of a team this year. And even considering that, I always say when you look at those teams that are kind of near the bottom of the standings, you take the statistics and the analytics with a grain of salt, because you do remember that it's not one of the better teams. So you look at his underlines, 48% of the shot attempts last year. On a team like Calgary, that's a solid number. Just a shade under 50% of the high danger chances for it with Calgary, and expected goals percentage also just a shade under 50%. And like you said, you look at his last real full season in 21-22. Now, granted, that was probably a little bit better of a Flames team, but still 9 goals, 22 assists, 31 points in 73 games. This is a player who has a lot of value, but then you look at, unfortunately, he has to take a break to focus on his mental health and get himself right, which we're always happy to see a player do. He only made $2.5 million in his last contract, and that was an RFA arbitration deal. So now he's a full UFA, and you don't figure, putting that all together, that he's due for some big raise. He might get the same kind of deal, maybe around $3 million. But if you can get a 27-year-old defenseman with this track record at $3 million for 3 to 4 years, I think that's a bet you make all day long, because he has shown that he can play at a fairly high level. And if you can shore up your defense with a guy like that, you take that chance all day long.
Yeah, I mean, a 3-year deal for, 12, 13 million, I think would make sense for someone like Kylington. And it also makes sense for the Penguins, especially with their salary cap situation. But you don't have to give this guy a bunch of term. I don't think he's going to be out there looking at 5 to 6 year deals in free agency. I think you can be able to get him for 3 to 4 years. And his last full season, you look at the underlyings for 2021, 2022, when he was on the ice, the Flames had 54% of the shot attempts, plus 26 at 5-on-5. That is very good. Again, I don't look at plus minus very often, but if you are a plus 26 at 5-on-5 in almost 1,200 minutes during that time, you're doing something right. Also, 55% of the expected goal share, 56% of the scoring chances, 56% of the high danger chances. He had a great year in 2021, 2022 before taking a break to focus on his mental health. So he still has quite a bit of real good hockey left, and he would make this team a lot better in numerous ways. You could put him on your second power play if you want. You could put him on the penalty kill. Great at 5-on-5 deck. You can interchange him with Chris Letang or Erik Karlsson. It just makes sense for a variety of reasons.
And this is one of those savvy signings that you can make when you're where the Penguins are at this juncture, because he's going to hopefully get you a good amount of productivity. He's going to come at a cheaper cost, more than likely. And an underrated part of his game, you look at his career statistics, he only has 52 penalty minutes in total. In his high watermark for penalties was 2019-20, the season that got shortened by the pandemic. He only had 16 penalty minutes. Last year, only 12, 21, 22, 14. So this is a disciplined player who brings you a lot of positive value. So this is, in my opinion, the exact kind of signing that the Pittsburgh Penguins need to make, because like I said, good track record of success. He has been a positive player in most of the seasons he's played in, and you're not going to have to pay top dollar to get him. You look at a lot of the UFAs, especially defensemen that are on the market this year, they are going to command top dollar. And you look at where the Penguins are, both as a franchise and just with the salary cap, you're probably not going to be in play for a lot of those guys, if any of them. So if a guy like Kylington is available and Calgary does not want to bring him back, that should be one of your first calls on July 1st.
This free agent class may not be good, but there are some good diamond in the rough options for the Penguins. We've discussed a few others on this show. Kylington definitely fits that mold where I think you could be getting a steal with
for
him.
Sure. And like I said, only making $2.5 million on his current, well, now formerly current contract. I don't see a world where he gets much of a raise, maybe up to $3 million, but I don't see him going much higher than that.
Yeah, 3.5 million, I think, is the range that you're looking at for this player. I'd be kind of surprised if he got 4 to 4.5 million per year or anything like that. But I also know that GMs tend to throw out a lot of money in term on free agent frenzy day. But that'll do it for this second segment of today's show. Coming up to end the show, we're going to continue our season in review series with John Ludvig and look at his future with the Penguins organization. That's coming up right after this. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Damp. So, Pat, we continue to inch closer to being done with our season in review series. And today we have defenseman John Ludvig up after doing P.O. Joseph on Tuesday. Ludvig played in 33 games for the Penguins this past season, 3 goals, 5 points during that time. His underlyings were, I think, okay. When he was on the ice, the Penguins had 51% of the shot attempts. They also had about 50% of the expected goals, 51% of the scoring chances, and a whopping 54% of the high danger chances. He played 351 total minutes of 5-on-5 ice time. The biggest thing, though, minus 12 when he was on the ice at 5-on-5. So that is not that good there. But there is one main thing that he brings that I like, and that is physicalness. I know that the Penguins don't have a lot of very physical players on this team. It's something that's definitely lacking, especially when you look at the final 4 teams still playing in the NHL playoffs right now. But Ludvig is never afraid of throwing the body. He's never afraid of stepping in, especially when a player gets hit hard. He's also never been afraid of fighting. He was doing that throughout the season as well. But that said, I still want to see more of what he has to offer outside of being physical and being able to lay the boom. I want to see what he can do in his own zone. I felt like he was lacking a little bit at times throughout the season there. I also want to see if he can maybe bring a little bit more offense. I just think there has to be more to his game than just being physical. I think that's what I'm just trying to say.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I do like the fact that he is a physical defenseman. It's something the Penguins have lacked for quite some time. They don't need a big time bruiser. They don't need a guy to go out and be intimidating or anything like that, but they definitely need a physical presence. I hate to use this word, but I really have a lack of a better term at this point. They do need a bit of a deterrent, a guy who that is looming and can throw those big hits. But at the same time, Ludvig will be 24 when next season starts. I know everybody has screamed and yelled about wanting this team to get younger. Well, there's a young defenseman, and he's only played 33 games. And you brought up his underlyings. Like, when he's on the ice, this team isn't playing poorly. It's not like he's a drag on possession. He's not big just for big's sake. And the fact of the matter is, he's actually not that big. He's 6'1", but he is 213, which is pretty heavy. So he plays a pretty solid game. But I would like to see him get better at some puck movement. I would like to see him drive offense a little bit. I'm not saying he's got to become Chris Letang or Erik Karlsson, but you would like to see him have a little bit better of a shot selection, move the puck a little bit better, and make a little bit better of first breakout passes, because he did struggle with that at times. But I really like what they have in Ludvig, because it feels like at 23, he did not look out of place on an NHL blue line. He's got plenty of room to grow. And for a defenseman like him, who's going to be 6, 7, 8, 5 points in 33 games is not a bad workload at all.
Right. And I still want to see him defend a little bit better one-on-one in his own zone. I felt like he was struggling a bit with that during the games this past season. But I mean, yeah, he obviously has more room to grow. He doesn't even make $800K on his contract. I think at this point, he's a very sound number 6 to number 8 guy. I don't think I want him in the lineup on an every night basis. I think if he is your number 6 defenseman, you're maybe not doing enough overall. And yes, people, I understand he's young. He has more room to grow. You want to give him a little bit more of a sample. But I think right now they still have, if they bring back P.O. Joseph, I would want Joseph to play over Ludvig. I think he's a good depth option to have that you can play 40 to 45 to 50 games a season, something like that. I just don't think at this point he can play all 82. Maybe he can grow into that a little bit, but I think overall he's just a really good depth player to have on your blue line. There's a lot more worse number 7 options out there, to say the least.
For sure. And we, kind of building off what we talked about with Kylington, this is also another good thing that you can have in the Penguins system. If you bring back POJ, you go out and get a guy like Kylington, you might still have Ryan Shea. You're still going to have, hopefully, Jack St. Ivany. You're going to have a lot of competition at the bottom of the defense. And that's a luxury you'd like to have, between both having depth and guys who are going to have to continually bring it every time they get a chance. To steal the Mike Tomlinism, it's going to be iron sharpening iron, because all of these guys are going to have to make their mark when they get a chance. And it'll show you, okay, what do we have in these players? And they're going to have to do their best to stay in the lineup and hold on to a lineup spot. And that usually, if those guys are up to it, will bring out the best in them. Or you learn, okay, maybe this guy isn't a full-time NHL defenseman, but this other guy is. And the way Ludvig has played and the way he's carried himself, he strikes me as a guy who's not going to shy away from that kind of competition.
Yeah, I would agree there. And that's another camp competition that I'm really looking forward to seeing once September rolls around. Who's going to be that number 7 defenseman? Heck, who's going to maybe be that number 6 defenseman, depending on other moves they make for this defensive group for this season. As for an overall grade, it's kind of incomplete, but if I had to give one, I guess I would go with a B- to a C.
That's about where I am. I liked a lot. I think you have to go incomplete. I liked a lot of what I saw from him, but there were injuries and other circumstances that kind of held him out from getting more of a look. But I liked what I saw overall, but incomplete grade, because we only got 33 games of it. He also had a very rough injury early in the year, so tough to give a grade. But I would say at this point, I want to see more of him, and I liked what I've seen, and I'm curious to see how he grows as a defenseman for the Penguins.
Yep, I agree with you, but I think that'll do it for today's episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. Thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to / watch this one. Pat and I will be back with another show for you all on Thursday to discuss the latest news surrounding the Pittsburgh Penguins and to potentially finish our season in review series. I think we only have one, if not two more players left to review for this year. But for Patrick Damp, I'm Hunter Hodes. Thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to / watch this one, and we'll be back on Thursday.